Successful people learn how to make their mind work for them. I'm David Nagel, and this is the Successful Mind Podcast.
I want to talk to everybody today a little bit about something that might help them increase their income and change their mindset around how much they're actually earning. One of the things that I have attempted to do for quite some period of time is to really help people make a shift, get some kind of awareness around the mindset idea of, wealth consciousness. And I'm always looking at different ways of, how can that aha happen for someone to make a shift. And I want to give you one of those principles today that I think might help some of you that are on the call. The idea here is that I'm going to ask you to take a couple of notes just so that you have a visual for yourself of what this actually looks like. But it's a very interesting behavior pattern that takes place with someone who is struggling to make a quantum leap in earning more money. So what I'd like you to do is, on a sheet of paper, about halfway down the sheet of paper, draw a horizontal line across the paper and write down the word need, N-E-E-D, and write down roughly how much money you need to pay your bills every month. Now, don't make this complicated. Don't say, does that include this, that, or the other. Just write down roughly how much you need every month to pay your bills. Now, above that line, I would like you to draw another line a few inches above it, the same kind of horizontal line across the paper. And on that line, I would like you to write the amount of money that you have most earned above how much you need every month. So just as an example, if your bills are $5,000 a month and your highest month is $9,000, then write $9,000 on that upper line. Go ahead and do that now. Great. Now, go below the need line, maybe 4 or 5 inches, and draw another horizontal line across the paper, and write down the number, the lowest number that you have gone below your need. So as an example, if you need $5,000 a month, and some months you come up with 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, whatever that number is, write it down on that line. When we're talking about increasing a person's income, we're not talking about increasing it so that they go from their need to a higher amount once, twice, or kind of semi-often. So that it happens once in a while. We're talking about raising that bar above your need so that it becomes something that is happening all the time. It's a new set point, if you will. It's the new normal. If you're going to go from 5,000 to 10,000, that means that you no longer go back down to 5,000. You go up to 10,000 and you stay there, and then you increase from 10,000 beyond, going up. But this rarely happens for people. Typically, the behavior pattern and the reality pattern is that every so often they will earn more than their need line, and more often than not, they do not hit the need line, but somewhere between their very bottom and what it is that they need. Now, this is the interesting part. You would think that whatever a person needed would be their very bottom, but it actually isn't. If you'll write the word, there's a word I want you to write between your very bottom line and what your monthly need is, and that word is survival. Survival. Now, why are we writing that word there? Well, we're writing that word there because if you were raised generally anything other than very wealthy, if you were raised middle class, working class, or below, your family and the people that were around you spent a lot of time navigating between the need line and the bottom line. Now, here's something that's interesting. The bottom line really isn't the bottom either. Like we said, you would think the need line would be the bottom. But for most people, it isn't, because everybody has learned how to navigate between what they need and what they don't have. That's survival. The bottom line that you've written down for yourself is, it may be your bottom line, but it is not the bottom line, because unless you have starved before, I mean, literally went hungry, or you have been homeless, completely destitute, that bottom line has a ways to go from what your experience probably is. Now, there may be somebody on this call that has been in that situation before, but that really doesn't matter, because the bottom is the bottom in somebody's mind, not necessarily whatever reality dictates is the bottom, because every person that you meet has a different bottom. Now, next to survival, you can write the word tolerate. Tolerate. That means that it is okay for you to spend time between what you need and what your bottom acceptable amount is. Here's the interesting thing. We have learned, for some weird reason, that if we don't meet our need, we will say that that's not acceptable, that's not okay, that's not responsible. But we also have heard some version of that it happens to everybody. So we learn how to survive below that line. And the fascinating thing about it is that the further below that line that you go, the more urgency that is developed within you, that you create within yourself to actually do something different, where you go from something should happen to something must happen, and at that moment you hit or you get whatever it is that your bottom line actually requires. Does that mean that you pay your bills on time? No, not necessarily. Does that mean you haven't had to scrimp on something? No, not necessarily. It could mean that you've had to give things up. It could mean that you've had to sell something. It could mean that you definitely had to go without or not pay something or somebody, but you've lived below that line. And we have learned that there is an acceptable practice to living below that line. There are millions and millions of middle-class, working-class individuals that learn how to navigate between the bottom line and the need line. And above the need line is usually considered something in the area of luck, excess, a gift, once in a while, thank God, that type of thing, if extra money actually comes in. So our programming is very much around what we need and what our bottom line is, like when something must drastically change in order for us to eventually meet our needs. So what's interesting is that everybody that has that bottom line, rarely, without some kind of physical or mental illness taking place, do they, or just completely agree with the fact that they will become totally destitute in life, do they rarely go beyond that bottom line. And that bottom line is different for every single person. And the fascinating thing about it is that where they didn't have what they need, at the need line, they managed to figure out how to get it at the bottom line or somewhere in between. Well, it's not really something that's magical. It's actually something that's taking place in the framework of our mind as what we will actually tolerate as our bottom line. What we'll tolerate as our bottom line. If we understand that we can raise that line, then we understand how to raise the line that is our highest income. Now, here's what I want you to get here. Here's the abundance lesson in this. Until you learn how to raise that bottom line, you'll never raise the top one. The top one being the most you've ever earned. Now, you could even draw another line beyond the most you've ever earned, and that line would be the most that you have wanted to earn. That could be a dream, a goal, an aspiration that you have in life, something that you really want. And that one, of course, would be above the most you've ever earned line. The interesting thing is that you haven't gone above the most you've ever earned line, and you haven't gone below the least line on the page. You're hovering, you're living between those two lines. The question is why? Why do we live? Why does most of society live between those two lines when those two lines are not something that exists in the reality outside of ourselves, but they're literally drawn in our mind? We drew those lines psychologically in our mind based on the beliefs that we've created about life, about money, about opportunity, about jobs, about how we get paid, about what our bills are, about right and wrong, about responsibility. All different kinds of things go into play when you really dig into how did a person create these lines for themselves. You find that some people come from the ghetto, and they come out with a determination not to have the ghetto being their bottom line. So they raise that line to a very lofty height, beyond need, beyond the most you've ever earned in the past, something that is much higher for society itself. And then that becomes their bottom line, and they manage to pull themselves into the realm of earning an income that is way up there in the income range that you would like to earn for yourself. So the reason that I mentioned the ghetto is, can we say that it's experience that creates the bottom line? Well, experience is part of creating the bottom line, but it really doesn't tell the whole story. What tells the whole story is what we're comfortable with. That really tells what the story is, because those lines represent basically not money as much as how comfortable you are living the way that you are. Now, I'm not here to judge or make you right or wrong or whatever. I'm just trying to show you how these lines get created. So if and when you choose to move them, you understand how to move them and what created them to begin with so that you can move them. If you look at the very bottom line that you draw for yourself, somewhere in your psychology it is more uncomfortable to go below that line than it is to do whatever is necessary just above that line to make sure that you don't go below it. If you look at the middle line, your need, for a lot of people, that line is not their bottom line, and it should be their bottom line, because it's also where their obligations are, is at that line. However, it is not, many people have developed that it is not uncomfortable enough to dip below that line in order to get them to do whatever is necessary to meet the need, but to actually go further down and make that area acceptable. So it means that it's acceptable, even though these are the same people that will tell you about responsibility. Somewhere in their mind, it's acceptable to go below that line. That means that there is a comfort zone there. It doesn't mean that they like it. It doesn't mean that that's where they want to be or they wish to be. It just means that there's a comfort zone there. And then ask yourself, how many times do you go over your need line on a consistent basis? Because if you're not going over that need line on a consistent basis, it's more uncomfortable for you to go over that need line than it is to actually stay at that line or below it. It becomes a place that you tolerate, being comfortable within the sphere of the lines that you've drawn in your mind. Now, if you want to increase your income permanently, the only way to increase it permanently is not to focus on those top lines, but to pay attention to that bottom line. You have to raise that bottom line to a place that you are not willing to go below. It is the only way that I've ever seen somebody increase their income and keep it there, is if that bottom line gets raised. Most people learn, dream what you want. Write down all the wonderful things that you want in life. Go after all of those things. And yet they bounce back and forth. They try, they take a run at it, they take a stab at it, and they fall backwards. But unless they understand that that bottom line is what needs to be moved first, nothing will change. Because until your bottom line raises above your need line, you will never consistently make more than you need. So focus on where are you going to raise your bottom line next. And when you raise it, you have to understand that's a commitment. You're raising it to a place where you're saying, I will not ever, ever, ever tolerate my income going below this bottom line. When you do that, you will have successfully raised your income permanently.
Thanks for listening to the Successful Mind podcast. And if you like what you heard and you want to know more, go to davidnagel.com/free stuff.